And we're back. You're listening to the Talking Boxing with Police Show. You're watching us on the Fight Now television channel. And hey, if you don't have Fight Now on your sports channel lineup, you need to call your local television provider. And I don't care if you got satellite dish or cable. And tell them that you want Fight Now right now. For all the information on the channel, you can find it on their website, www.fightnow.com. And speaking of now, you know that intro. It means it's time for another episode of In the Ring with Billy C. and Steve Lott. And as you know, Steve Lott from the Las Vegas Boxing Hall of Fame. Steve joins us right now. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. It's nice and cool here in Las Vegas.
Hey, you know what? I know it happens to be really cool in Las Vegas right now, and I from what I understand, you're around what it is around here these days. Tell me it's not more than 25 degrees, right? Not right now, is it?
Well, last night it was so cold out that the flashers were not flashing; they were showing pictures of themselves.
Now that's a good one. There's one of those clean. There's one of those clean ones I like from you, Lot. You know. So, but anyway, hey, listen, man. We got this email, and this was right up Steve Lott's alley, and I figured I would ask you. This is coming from a loyal listener, Chatty Factory, who actually is in the business. He's getting into training professional boxers and stuff, so we wish him all the best. He had an interesting question for me, and I felt that it would be perfect to talk about with you. He said over the holidays he was reviewing some old fight films, and he noticed that it seemed that fights from the 70s and earlier, that the fighters would deliver their punches virtually with their gloves open. And he wanted to know if there's any reason for that. And I honestly never noticed it. The only thing that came to my mind was the thumbless gloves and everything like that. I've since asked some opinions on people and got varying explanations. In your experience, after all the video you've reviewed, is that something that is the case?
Well, it's a good question. Obviously, the first big point is the thumbless glove. Now, with the thumbless glove, with the attached glove or the thumbless glove in the last 25, 30 years, it's more difficult for a fighter to keep his hands open. Most of the time, when that happens, it's due to the trainer, the teacher, originally. The last fighter to actually do that so obviously holding the hands open while punching was George Foreman. He tried to catch his opponent's punches on the way in. And when he was taught that, he might have caught some of the other guy's punches with his open hands, but he couldn't punch back immediately because his hand was open. It all depends on the teacher, whether it was the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It depends on the teacher. Joe Louis had his fists closed. Jack Dempsey had his fists closed. And definitely Sugar Ray Robinson had his fists closed. Some others, depending on the teacher, taught the fighter, when you want to defend yourself, you catch the punch with your hands instead of the much more effective way by moving the head. The other thing about keeping the hands open is when you throw punches from far away, it's very difficult to close that fist. The closer you get to the opponent, the easier it is to keep your fist closed and land with the knuckles. So most of the trainers would tell the fighters stay away from the guy, catch the punches, and hit him at the far end of the reach. And it's very amateurish.
You know, to me, a good teacher would get his fighter, in the gym to just do things automatically so that they wouldn't, have to think too much during a fight. And you shift into auto gear and you apply what you've been doing in the gym over and over and over. I mean, what do you think about a comment like that?
Well, that's absolutely correct. If the trainer was teaching the fighter something that was very fundamental, that can be done exactly the same way over and over, and was effective. So there are many trainers who teach a kid to do the same thing over and over and over, but it's completely the opposite of what should be done. A perfect example of that is a trainer teaching a fighter, when the jab comes to you, you move your head to the right to get out of the way. Now, if you look at every fight film ever, when a fighter moves his head to the right, and usually that's called laying on the right, he's in very big jeopardy of getting hit with huge right hands because they come across the body like that. The trainer doesn't know that he should be teaching the fighter to move the head to the left. Now, it looks like the fighter is moving into the punch, but in effect he's moving to the outside of the punch. So little things like that, when the fighter tries it in the fight, it doesn't work. And that happens with footwork, it happens with the body motion. It all depends on the trainer and what he teaches the fighter. If it works and it's specific and the fighter can do it under pressure, then it will work, it'll look good.
You know, we've talked a lot about, you know, the lack of good teachers today in terms of trainers and stuff. And, you know, people are always forever going back, you know, what if we had a time machine, you know, what would have Jack Dempsey done to a Klitschko and what have you. And what we've been talking about a lot this week and really actually for the last couple of weeks has been, you know, a combination of poor refereeing and poor judging. And one of the questions was raised to me, you know, were the judges, we'll start with them first, were the judges of yesteryear, and again, can you base it on the footage that you've seen and some of the results? You know, obviously we have to assume, you know, the result of the fight, what you just watched, did the judges do a good job or not? Is that something that we also are lacking? Do we need judges that can actually teach another person to judge? I mean, you know, there seems to be a lot of controversial decisions these days. Is it the judging or just the perception of you know, the people watching it or calling it or whatever?
Well, that's a very difficult thing because judging is very subjective. Every judge thinks of a positive point for one fighter's side in a different way than someone else. It's a little bit easier in baseball. When the guy hits the ball, if it goes past the infield, it's a hit. And everyone says that's a hit. That's 1,000% everyone on the same side. But at the end of a round of boxing, that's close. Because it's subjective, it's almost like looking at a piece of art. One person may say, well, it's a little off color. The other person may say, well, I think the color is good, but the way it's presented is not that. It's so difficult. Now, in the history of boxing, it's pretty rare that a decision is so off balance, so out of whack, that it's offensive. And, you know, a very few come to mind. You know, Lewis Walcott, a first fight where Lewis was given the decision even though Walcott beat him. Maybe Saxton and Basilio, the first fight was very close. Pastrano and Harold Johnson was a very close fight. But other than that, most of the fights were you know, considered very well judged. And even today, it's you got to get a bad one, a decision once in a while, but that's very rare, and it's only because it's so subjective. It's not like hitting a baseball past first base.
You know, and that's the key, and I agree with your explanation of that, and the word subjective is the key here. And, you know, boxing is like no other sport. You mentioned baseball. Well, baseball's a statistic. You know, you hit the ball. You know, you hit the ball, you know, 5 times out of 10, you're batting 500. It's a statistic. There's no question. You know, in football, you get handed the ball, 10 times, you get 100 yards, you're averaging 10 yards a carry. You know, in boxing, you know, we're supposed to believe these statistics that someone else is subjectively recording, and then you have announcers that are talking about these statistics like they are mathematical statistics, like I just said, in baseball and football and what have you. I mean, I don't think that we can really do that as long as the human element is involved. What's your thoughts?
Well, that's true. That's good and it's bad. The bad part is that you don't know how the judge is scoring the fight. You just don't know round by round, and you don't know how they're looking at each fighter and how they're scoring. The good part is the excitement. If a fight is close, and a fight is big, and a fight is on pay-per-view, and the fight was a war on both sides, the decisions and the way they're announced are the most incredibly exciting things to listen to in the world. And, you know, a couple of them that come to mind, like Robinson Basilio first fight at Yankee Stadium, where this great announcer, Johnny Addy, had this incredible New York East Side voice, and one Robinson and then Basilio in the winner, and knew the crowd goes bananas, Now, that's going to happen when you don't know round by round. To a lesser extent, that happens in the Olympics with something like the diving and the gymnastics. The performance is over, and you wait for the voting. Now, in some of those Olympics, they take out the high vote and low vote. Maybe in boxing there should be 5 judges, or 6 judges, or 7. And you take out the high and the low, and you use the ones in between. But overall, it's been pretty close. It's been pretty close.
One of the things that, we'll never have a definitive answer on is, the fighters of yesteryear, how would they stack up with the athletes and fighters of today? And it's a trick question because no one has the right answer, and it's subjective and it's opinionated and everything else. But based on the footage that you've seen, and I know that you're more versed on the older footage compared to the newer stuff that's out. But do you think that the boxing ability, based on the amount, the type of people these guys were, the teachers that they had, the profession itself? I mean, you were boxing was a trade. I mean, just like a carpenter or a plumber. These guys would become boxers. That's their full-time job. That's what they did. 5, 6, 7 days a week. It wasn't like they worked as a construction guy and then boxed on the weekends. It was a job. With that said, and as best as you could, make an opinion on, would the older fighters, not specific, I'm not saying, would so-and-so beat this guy or so-and-so beat that guy, but overall, in general, do you think the older fighters would compete with today's athletic fighter?
While athletics and the athleticism of the fighter is always very critical, the depth of boxing back in the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the amount of gyms and the amount of fighters in each gym, was a deeper well of fighters to look toward. Today, that well is, of course, the Hispanic audience and the Hispanic fighters. That well of fighters is getting bigger and bigger, so that's good. The comparing of the two eras, whether it's the 20s, 30s, 40s to today, both those groups are great. Both the fighters from those time periods could measure up to the ones today. The ones from today could measure up to the ones in the past. The thing that's so difficult to do in boxing, in baseball, one home run doesn't win the game. The game continues on. In football, one touchdown does not win the game. There's another 3 periods. In boxing, we all might think that a certain fighter from the 30s would beat a guy today. But you don't know, because one punch in 12 rounds or 15 rounds, and you and I would say, wow, I didn't think he'd land that so early. The ball game is over. And that's what makes boxing so great, that one home run, one touchdown, the ball game is over. And you never know. Perfect examples are, Tyson Douglas or Pacquiao and Marquez. One home run, the ball game is over, and you never know.
One other thing, I actually have a Tyson thing we're going to close with today. But one thing, today the big criticism with boxing is there's too many belts. There's too many sanctioning bodies. There's too many belts. You got too many contenders, too many this, too many that. And it dilutes it. So, you could conceivably have, if you're going to count 5 major sanctioning bodies, we all know that there's double digits, but if you picked 5, you could conceivably have, let's say, 5 middleweight world champions. You could conceivably have 50 top 10 world-ranked middleweights. I mean, it's absurd. However, if you go back in time and you look at the old days, and I'm saying, like you're saying, the teens, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, there were other titles. We had several world titles. As a matter of fact, there was a time in the 20s and into the 30s that many states had their own world title, including New York. Do you think that there was as much value on those titles, or were they looked upon as secondary titles, the way we kind of look at the more, known sanctioning bodies today?
Well, in the same way that if an organization started today and their fighter could never get on TV, and never get on pay-per-view. And, of course, many of the organizations today, some of the fighters I've never heard of and I've never seen. They're never on HBO. They're never on TV, anywhere. Back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, those fighters, the ones that were not seen, really it didn't matter what organization sponsored them. Let's say it was the New York State Athletic Association, New York State Boxing Association had a fighter. Maybe back then the fighter would have been known in New York as a champion, but outside of New York, because he was never filmed, it wasn't like Joe Louis being shown in movie theaters, or Sugar Ray Robinson being shown in movie theaters, or Henry Armstrong fights being shown in movie theaters. Those are the fighters that the press around the country and around the world recognizes as champions. The fighters that came in from Europe to fight the great champions here, the world champions, whether it was Firpo coming in to fight Dempsey or Schmeling coming in to fight Lewis, they came in because those were the world champions. They never went anywhere to fight the New York State champion. So because today there are so many organizations, it really does get watered down. But it was not watered down in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s.
We just did a blast from the past on a former middleweight world champion in the 1920s, Johnny Wilson. Did you ever get a chance to watch any video of him? And was he good? There's a lot of rumors about him, and a lot of his fights they claim were fixed and this and that. Did you get a chance to see any fights of Johnny Wilson? And what was your assessment of him as a fighter?
I would have loved to have seen him. There's not one frame of footage of Johnny Wilson in action. Not fighting, not sparring, not walking down the street, not having dinner, zero. There are a couple of still photos of him with appearing with Greb or some of the other fighters from that era. I remember his face. I remember the big nose, a little pointed to the side after getting hit from 7,000 shots, you know, but not one frame of footage. And that's the sad part about that era. And the teens, 20s, 30s, some of those fighters were just never filmed, whether it was Jack Britton or Greb or Wilson or even a guy who's had 400 fights like Maxie Rosenblum. You wish you could have seen him. So all we can do is look at the newspaper reports, and you never know how the newspaper report accurately reflects what the fighter did until you look at the film. Yeah. The same way today that many historians look back at Charlie Burley, this wonderful light heavyweight from the 40s and 50s, and mesmerizing the reports. No one wanted to fight him. But we look at the film, wonderful guy, but very ordinary. Maybe no one wanted to fight him because he wasn't a draw. But until you see the film, you just don't know.
You know, again, we get back to that technology issue about film. You know, if you don't see the film, you know, some of these great fighters are you know, they can't be put in perspective because there's nothing that people can see and touch and feel. And it bothers me. I mean, I understand it, you know, and you know, I'm the same way. I guess it's just, you know, everybody knows boxing's subjective, and then all of a sudden you're expecting someone to believe what a writer wrote, and this writer says he's the greatest of all time, so that means I say he's the greatest of all time. And I know it's hard. It's hard to swallow, but I mean, it's not their fault that they were born in that during that time. It kind of sucks, you know.
It does, and you know, every 10 years a film pops up that no one knew existed, of a world champion from that time period, or even 30s or 40s, that you'd say, wow, this is unbelievable. That happened about 15 years ago. A historian, a great guy, Frank Stallone, found an Abe Attell film fighting Johnny Kilbane. The first film of Abe Attell ever found. Very poor quality film from the early teens. And when I put it on my desk to view it for the first time, to send it in for processing, it was fun to be the first guy in almost a century to see Abe Attell in action. And while he was considered one of the great fighters of all time, and he was, it wasn't quite looking at Roberto Duran fight or, you know, fighting Harada or Willie Pep. Very competent, but until you see the guy fight, you just don't know.
One last question, man, and then I know you got some stuff to do, and you know, we're going to hang up on you after one last question.
Okay.
Mike Tyson, yeah, you know him a little bit, and I just happened. I'm trying to figure out how to how to work this device to take some old VHS stuff I have onto DVD deck, and I follow the instructions, and it's not recording, and I'm getting frustrated. But anyway, I throw in this VHS, and what pops up? The second Mike Tyson Holyfield fight, and I watched the fight, and again, and I noticed two things, Steve. The first thing I noticed was that, Mike Tyson was not with Kevin Rooney at this point and everything else. And I clearly could see, and this was the first time I watched this fight again since it took place, okay? And I'm watching, the walk from the dressing room and everything, and I'm looking at Mike Tyson, and I'm saying to myself, this is clearly not Mike Tyson. This is a different guy. This is a guy that was looking for the referee for help, in a sense. This was a guy that after the interview, after the fight, in the post-fight interviews, he was justifying biting off and spitting out Evander's ear and everything else. When, in your opinion, did you see Mike Tyson not be the Mike Tyson that, in my opinion, is an all-time great fighter?
Well, it's a good question. When fighters come back, let's just say that Mike came back after the 92 to 95 prison sentence, and of course without Kevin. Even in the history, when a fighter came back to fight, he just wasn't the same. Joe Louis, when he came back, for example, to fight Ezra Charles, but they weren't the same physically. They were the same mentally, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, but only physically they were older. That was not the case with Mike, especially in the second Holyfield fight. Not only was he not the same fighter physically because of Kevin's great input in the training all the time, the critical part for Mike was, and it's difficult for someone who doesn't know him, the emotional status. Mike was very sensitive and very emotional. So in walking into the ring for the second Holyfield fight, he's carrying baggage that is enormous. Another fighter like Liston would have just rushed it off, but Mike carries it. That baggage was, he knew he dumped Caton and Jacobs and Kevin, got to Don King. His whole fortune was taken away. His commercials on TV for Pepsi-Cola, Nintendo Video that he did with Caton and Jacobs, gone. Spokesperson roles for the FBI, DEA, New York City Police Department, gone. All the things that he loved being a hero. Getting sent to prison in 92. 3 years in that is weighing on him as he's walking into the ring. He's still walking in there. He hears people say to him, because of his demeanor being changed over the years, yelling at him, you bum, you bum. He hears that. He gets into the ring to fight Evander. He knows the other guy knocked him out the fight before. Now all the stuff is dwelling in his mind, being hated and despised, going to prison, dumping all the people that helped him, getting ripped off by Don King, getting knocked out by Evander the first time. With Mike, that affected his fighting more than anything else. Anything else. And in the fight, because he was not doing well, all that stuff started to well up in him. And the same way someone might cut you off at a stoplight, if everything in your life is beautiful, no problem, go ahead, you go. But if you've got problems in your life, your credit cards are overdue, your wife is having a problem with her medical, you're going to blow up at that stoplight and start cursing at that guy and start beeping the horn. That's what happened with Mike. He went under, he couldn't take it, and that's when he bit Evander. Had nothing to do with getting back at Evander with the headbutts. Couldn't care less. It was the pressure of all that baggage.
Great point on that, man. I tell you, I think you hit it on the head, and we all have the luxury now to be able to go back and dissect everything with Mike, but that's I think you hit it right on the head. And in the post fight, he's justifying, say, now look at my face, I can't see him, I got to go home to my children like this, and they're all, we don't know nothing about it. We don't know if he bit him. We're just going by it. And I'm saying to myself, looking back at it all these years later, seeing that slow-mo shot over and over and over. What do you mean you don't know if he bit him, But, it's a shame. Mike Tyson will always be one of my favorite fighters, and I've always said that together he and Kevin were an unstoppable force. but separately, neither one of them were able to do much without the other, and it's a shame. It was a duo that really could have, in my opinion anyway, have gone down as one of the greatest combos the sport has ever seen. At least that's my opinion.
Well, when you have a fighter like Mike Tyson, while Kevin, had a small role in developing Mike, it was really Customato. When you have a fighter like Mike Tyson, Kevin was able to maintain the fundamental stuff that Customato gave him. In any other instance, if a young 20-year-old Cassius Clay came to you tomorrow, you'd be a brilliant trainer also. It all depends on the fighter. And Kevin was fortunate to have Mike Tyson. For the gym up there, while Kevin would be able to teach someone else the same thing, he's very capable of doing that, there's no one who moves to Catskill regularly to learn that. The town is very quiet. The gym has 2 people in there. If Kevin had a gym in Brooklyn, New York, with 600 kids in there every day, in the last 20 years, he would have had a couple of world champions. It's numbers. You've got to have a lot of kids in the gym to develop a fighter. The Kronk gym in Detroit. You get 400 kids in there every day for 20 years, somebody's going to develop into a fighter. It's all numbers. But Kevin, you're right. Kevin and Mike together were terrific.
Yeah, you're right. Nothing but, the law averages. I go to, I haven't been there in a few years, but, I go up to Kevin's gym, and it's chilling because he still uses the tapes that Cuss made, I don't know how many years ago, and you hear Customato's voice, 7, 3, and that's what his fighters are training by. They're throwing the punches that Customato trained all his fighters with. His numbered punching system, and it's pretty chilling when you think of the history behind it.
Well, it's in every sport. There's a number system. In football, they have these playbooks that are like computer readout sheets.
Yeah.
Every team has that. In baseball, you see the coaches call the signs from the sidelines. In basketball, as the player runs down the court, he holds up some numbers to show the other guys, this is the type of play I want. In boxing, move what?
Yeah.
Punch, how, what? The fighter should have a very specific kind and number of punches so that he can remember that under pressure. Mike never threw haphazard punches, never. They were 2- and 3-punch combinations by the number system that he remembered over and over and over. The result is, well, how good a puncher was he? Sensational. Well, how accurate was he? Sensational. How often did he land? Very often. When you look at all those things, you say to yourself, well, how did that come to be like that? It was the number system. It's the same thing, just like a football play. They run it over and over. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes not, but you remember it under pressure. And that's what a fighter has to do to make him the best, is to remember something under pressure he can do over and over.
Yeah, exactly what I feel like this was a Seinfeld show, right? Exactly what we started out with, doing it all so much in the gym, it becomes automatic, so you don't have to think.
Yes, exactly. It's like that in every other sport. When you hear trainers say, I want my fighter to think for himself. Think for himself. In what sport? Can you imagine the quarterback telling the coach, I'm going to call the plays from now on, you can just sit down.
Yeah.
What did you say?
Right.
So it's like that film with Gene Hackman and Keanu Reeves where Keanu says, I'm calling the plays. What do you mean? I'm the coach. I'm calling I'm the guy. In boxing, it's incredible. The fighters have to make this stuff up, and it's very difficult because they're under pressure, and the proximity of the other guy is in their face. At least in football, you have the quarterback has a few seconds, until the other guys come around and try to get to him. That's not the case in boxing. The guy is right in front of your face. You have to have something in your system that turns on automatically, and the number system was great.
I agree 100%. Steve, another great episode, and I definitely look forward to the next one, my man.
Thank you very much, Billy. See ya.
All right, brother. Take care.
Bye.
That's Steve Lott from the Las Vegas Boxing Hall of Fame, and that was another episode of In the Ring with Billy C. and Steve Lott. Listen, I got to take a break. We'll be right back.